Chapter 7, Parley. The water from River Hills flowed clean, crisp, deep as memory and twice as unforgiving. The filtration rig bolted together from scorched tank frames and rebuilt vault pressure valves hummed like a resurrection engine. The first batch was tested, sealed, and labeled with the mark of Lancaster, a simple 717 pressed into steel caps. It wasn't just water now. It was currency. Leverage. A tool that could buy peace or bullets. And it was time to use it. Johnny stood over the trade cart as the barrels were lashed down 6 total, enough to supply West Lancaster's main camp for 2 weeks. Not a drop from their home reserves. Just extra. The pawn tithe. A message in liquid form. We can give more. We're worth more alive than dead. He gathered a small envoy. No more than 8. No heavy weapons. Just enough firepower to walk into enemy territory without being chewed up. On the second morning, they moved west. Across the fractured bridge where vines now wrapped around collapsed city buses like skeletal hands. Through the skeletal streets of old suburbia, where mailboxes still bore names of the long dead. Past burned-out schools where ferals once danced in silence and old ghouls told stories to the air. Until they reached the old West Lancaster barricades. Rusting steel sheets. Broken tires. Razor wire wrapped around telephone poles. Painted on the side of an old police truck. Not welcome unless you bleed. But this time, they were expected. Milo waited at the old municipal courthouse, leaning on a cane carved from rebar and bone. His people, those who could still talk, still think, stood in ranks. Some wore salvaged riot armor. Some wore nothing but layers and scars. All of them stared with narrowed eyes. "You're back," Milo said. "Didn't think you'd walk this far without a gunship." Johnny stepped forward. "Didn't need one." He waved a hand, and the tarps came off the barrels. The ghoul guards squinted. Eyes widened. Water. Pure. Cold. Marked. Tested. Surplus. Milo stepped closer, his dry skin cracking with each step. He tapped the seal on one of the barrels. "Where?" Johnny held his stare. "River Hills. Deep system. Untapped. We've got a rig set up. Pressure's stable. Source runs clear." Milo exhaled. For a ghoul, it almost sounded like laughter. "You brought us a gift. We brought a future." Silence settled. The kind of silence that comes just before a new chapter. The kind that smells like rust, dust, and unspoken truth. Then Johnny spoke again. "You want to trade? We trade. You want security? We offer that too. But this is the first step. No tricks. No dominance. We just want to rebuild. Together." Milo looked at the water. then at Johnny, then at the people behind him. The survivors. The former vault dwellers who now walked like war-seasoned founders. And he said only, "Tell your people to send more. And tell them West Lancaster is listening." Johnny nodded, turned, and as the envoy marched back toward the rising sun, toward Lancaster, toward the mill, toward the future they'd clawed from ruin, a whisper ran through the ruins behind them. Among the ghouls, among the wind, a name, a mission, a shared hope. They had done what they set out to do. They had turned survival into strength. Later that evening, beneath the cracked dome of the old West Lancaster courthouse, lit only by repurposed glow torches and a scavenged solar array bleeding power into the ancient wiring, Johnny stood with Milo and a handful of the older ghouls, the ones who still remembered the world before fire. He didn't come to boast. He came for answers. He leaned against the old judge's bench, one hand resting near the revolver at his side, not out of threat, but habit. His voice low, firm, but not cruel. There was a price for that water. He looked around the circle of them. Every face different, twisted, burned, but their eyes still alive. A band of ghouls was sitting on the aquifer. Not ferals. Organized. One of them came at me in T-45 power armor. Had a full-sized super sledge. Didn't speak like an animal. Spoke like a soldier. He paused. They didn't make it. None of them. He exhaled, and looked directly at Milo. But I want to know who they were. What they were. Because something tells me they didn't crawl out of a ditch. They came from somewhere. So tell me, what the hell were they before all this? The older ghouls shifted. A few muttered. One, an ancient, skeletal man with blacked-out goggles, leaned forward in his rusted folding chair and let out a slow wheeze. Milo glanced at him, nodded once, and the old ghoul began to speak. His voice was slow, broken, but the memories came out clear. Fort Pioneer. Old military complex. Northwest of River Hills, back before the war. It wasn't public. Not even for us. We used to joke about it, called it the Stone Box. A place where the army tested gear, ran dark drills, made soldiers that never came home. He coughed. Dried blood. Then continued. Not all of them were good people. Some were loyalists to the last breath, red-blooded patriots looking for glory in whatever came next. Others were psychos, trained for things we weren't supposed to know about. Milo spoke next. When the bombs fell, Pioneer didn't get hit hard. Not direct. But the fallout, it crawled in. Some of those boys stayed in their suits. Didn't take them off for days, weeks. And by the time they did, they were already starting to rot. Johnny listened in silence. Milo kept going. But they didn't die. They just stayed. A few wandered east. Most stayed buried in the hills. Heard one of them used to do radiation drills for fun. Acclimation routines, they called it. He looked up at Johnny now. If you killed one of those, you didn't just fight a ghoul. You fought one of the last soldiers from before the fire. The room fell quiet. Johnny didn't move for a long moment. He looked down, just once, remembering the weight of the power sledge, the glint of his own reflection in the cracked T-45 visor. Then he spoke. He called me Vault Rat. Like it was something burned into his skull before he even knew who I was. Milo nodded slowly. To them, it was all the same. Vaults. Secrets. Orders. They were trained to hold ground no matter what. And they did. Johnny looked out through the courthouse window, toward the distant valley they had bled to claim. Well, they held it long enough. He turned back, fire in his voice but no cruelty. Only the weight of truth. We're not here to bury the past. But if it tries to stop us again, we will. No one argued. No one dared. Because whatever those old soldiers were, they weren't Johnny Vanjik. Johnny stood there, arms folded, still half lit by the red glow of the courthouse lanterns. The warband leader's story still hung in the air like smog power armor, forgotten forts, rot that remembered orders. Every word burned deeper into the back of his mind. Then Milo stepped forward. The old ghoul cracked a grin wide, chipped, with the kind of teeth you only get from chewing bones and lies for 200 years. One thing's certain though, Johnny, if you pissed them off, and I mean really pissed them off. He jabbed a bony finger toward him, like he was sketching out prophecy in the dust. Then we need to band together. No more your half and our half. No more West and Central. We need one Lancaster City. Johnny raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Milo just chuckled and leaned in, voice low. And lucky for you, I got a playbook in mind, if you'll listen. The other ghouls quieted. Even the wind outside the courthouse stilled, like the ruins themselves were leaning in. We'll never gain the armor. Not enough. We'll never find enough clean fusion cores. Not enough firepower to take a military fortress packed with ghosts in power armor. But there are others. Mean ones. Big ones. Dangerous. The ones born from the same poison that made you. Super mutants. Johnny's face hardened. He didn't speak, he listened. Milo kept going, his gravel voice almost giddy with danger. Now, I know you haven't met one yet. But I have. Big green bastards. Skin like boiled meat. Some are dumb as concrete and twice as heavy. Smash first, maybe scream later. But not all of them. There's one. A leader. Sharp. Quiet. carries a sledge the size of a goddamn door frame and quotes old science books like they're prophecy. He leaned in further, whispering now. Kept his intelligence. Smart enough to hate bandits. Smart enough to organize. Smart enough to know ferals, raiders, and psychos will kill his kind before they kill ours. Johnny's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Right now, Milo continued, they're pissed off. Not at you. Not at me. At the world. At the ruins. At everything that crawled out of the ash and took what they thought would be theirs. He stepped back and spread his arms. And your people. Your camp told me what you are. What you survived. You think you're clean? Pure. He shook his head. You're one of us, Johnny. Mutant. Just like me. Just like them. Johnny's jaw tightened. Not in shame. In acceptance. Because it was true. The vault changed him. The spores rewired him. The FEV didn't mutate him. But it made him something else. Milo pointed to the map. Bossman. That town's dead now. Was never much. But it's empty. Quiet. Neutral ground. Word is, the smart one, the big one, his kind's been seen circling that way. He paused. We head there. You parley with the mutants. Not like a soldier. Not like a vault boy. He grinned. Like one of their own. Johnny looked at the map. At the path south. At the poisoned farmlands. At the ruins no one dared cross yet. And for the first time in months, he saw an opening. Not just a path forward, but a weapon. Not forged in steel or bullets, but in alliances the world never thought possible. He looked at Milo. Eyes cold. Voice even. All right then. We go to Bossman. Let's see if monsters really do play well together. Unity through the ashes. And beneath it all, the cold hum of war still rising on the horizon. They left at dawn. When the sky was nothing but bruised orange behind broken smokestacks and the last stars clung like bullet holes in the firmament. No banners. No scouts. No backup. Just 8 souls on foot. 5 from Lancaster. 3 from West Lancaster. And Johnny Vanjik leading them all. He wore a duster now stitched from salvaged vault uniforms and scaver canvas, sleeves rolled, collar up, shadow draped across his face. The .44 Magnum at his side gleamed in the half-light like a threat and a promise. Milo walked beside him, hunched but alert, carrying a shotgun that had clearly been fired in 2 wars too many. The others carried what they could. Homemade rifles, rebar spears, and one old fire axe with crush scratched into the blade in faded white paint. No one spoke. There wasn't much to say. They passed the edge of Lancaster's safe zone by sunrise. The perimeter barricades disappeared behind the tree line and vine-choked strip malls. No more patrols. No more watchers. Only quiet. Only risk. Bosman had once been a quiet, working-class town on the southwest fringe. No real landmarks. No industry. Just a handful of churches, some corner stores, and a train depot that hadn't seen a passenger since before the war. Now, it was a ghost shell. The town square was buckled with roots and scorched concrete. The gas station still had an old, bloated corpse melted to the driver's seat. Power lines hung like nooses across the skyline. And in the distance on the edge of the train yard, they saw it. A shadow that was too large, too still, too aware. It stepped forward. 9 feet tall. Muscles like stone sculpted under leather-thick skin. Green. Sickly, shining green. Wearing a torn lab coat turned into a cloak, cinched with a belt of wires and bones. In one hand, a sledgehammer the size of a motorcycle frame. Not raised. Just resting. His eyes locked with Johnny's. They were clear. Sharp. Not feral. Not lost. The others moved behind him, mutants of all shapes. Smaller, twitchier, some howling low like feral dogs. But they waited. Because he hadn't moved. Not yet. Johnny stepped forward. 1 pace. Then another. Then stopped. Halfway between the past and the future. He nodded once. No bow. No salute. Just respect. The mutant leader tilted his head. Spoke low. You are not human. Johnny didn't blink. No. Not anymore. Vault 717. Dark section. FEV. Radiation. I came out different. The mutant studied him. Glanced at the ghouls behind Johnny. Then at Milo. Then back. You are the one they speak of. Vanjik. Johnny's voice was like gravel and steel. You hate the ferals. The raiders. The scum. So do we. But there's more coming. Old world ghosts wearing armor and carrying orders they haven't updated in 200 years. We're not here to beg. We're here to align. The wind blew through Bosman, silent as a held breath. And finally, the mutant leader stepped forward. Parley accepted. Speak your terms, Vault Ghost. Let us see if this monster alliance is worth the blood it will save. And so, in the ruins of a town the world had forgotten, the mutants, the ghouls, and the ghost of Vault 717 began something no history book ever dared to imagine. Unity through the ashes. And beneath it all, the cold hum of war still rising on the horizon. Johnny didn't break eye contact. Didn't pace. Didn't posture. He just spoke clear, firm, grounded like a law etched in black stone. No bluff. No play. Just terms. And the weight that came with them. Fine. But if we're doing this, we're doing it right. He took a slow step forward, his boots now standing between old world wreckage and the foundation of something new. He held up 3 fingers. First, unification. No more fractured neighborhoods. No boroughs. No east, west, central, north or south. Bossman, West Lancaster, the mill, it's one city again. Lancaster. Whole. Unified. And built by the people who crawled out of the dark and chose to rise. 1 finger lowered. Second, trade. Education. Growth. We don't want slaves, soldiers, or silence. We want partners. Allies that know how to thrive. How to trade. How to manage resources. How to build markets. He gestured broadly, eyes locked on the mutant leader. You've got strength. We've got infrastructure. We teach you how to use the world again. Not just smash it. 2 fingers down. Only 1 left. And this one came with fire in the voice. Third. We need a team. A unit. A strike group. Wholly dedicated to one mission, ensuring Vault 717 never opens again. His voice dropped an octave. There are still things in there. Forgotten things. Experimental things. That vault is a curse buried in steel. And I want it locked, watched, and erased from the future. He let the silence sit. Like a gavel dropped in a courtroom. Let it weigh. Then added. You'll get more freedom than you've ever had. More power than anyone's given you since the bombs fell. But only if you stand with us. With Lancaster. If you can agree to those 3 things. He nodded once, deliberate. Then this alliance isn't temporary. It's permanent. And from here on out we rise together. The wind passed through the ruined streets like it carried the echoes of old war drums. Low and steady and impossible to ignore. And the eyes of ghouls and mutants alike turned to their leader. Waiting. Because the world had just changed. The silence that followed Johnny's final word hung heavy in the air. Not just in the square. Not just in the broken town of Bossman. But in the very bones of those gathered. The ghouls and mutants behind the leaders didn't cheer. Didn't growl. Didn't shift. They stood still. Like something ancient had been spoken aloud. Like the old laws had just been shattered and remade in real time. Milo the ghoul, whose voice usually rattled with cynicism, just stared. He looked around, from the fusion-barreled mutants to the gaunt ghouls to the sun slicing through the wreckage of old pre-war banners in the distance. Then, quietly, one Lancaster. He let out a dry, stunned chuckle. Never thought I'd hear that again. And this time, no sarcasm. Just hope. The mutant leader, still towering and unmoved, looked down at Johnny. He didn't shout. Didn't question. Instead, he turned to his own the green-skinned brutes, the broad-shouldered berserkers with pipe hammers and rusted plate armor. They watched him like dogs waiting for the storm to roll in. He raised one arm, massive, scarred, marked with old radiation scoring, and pointed east, toward Lancaster. Then he spoke, deep and commanding. "We will guard the vault. With blood and memory. Let the place that made monsters stay buried beneath its own sin." The mutants pounded their weapons against the ground once. Thud. 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 Not war cries. Not threats. Oaths. Milo stepped forward, his voice louder now. "And if you'll teach us trade, Johnny Vanjik." He grinned that broken grin again. "Then we'll teach your kids how to survive a radstorm with nothing but a pipe wrench and spite." That got a few chuckles even from the mutants. A few of the ghouls clapped each other on the shoulder. The tension dropped. Weapons lowered. And one voice from the back, dry and raspy, spoke like someone waking from a 200-year sleep. "One Lancaster. Then another. One city. And then." They all said it. Quiet. Grim. Real. One Lancaster. Johnny watched. Didn't smile. Didn't raise a fist. Didn't bask. He just nodded once. Eyes glowing faint in the morning light. Because this wasn't a victory. This was a beginning. The moment the alliance solidified, it was as if the air itself shifted. No more guessing. No more holding ground. Now. It was time to take it. Fort Pioneer. The last remnant of the old world's silent army. A military complex buried in hills and bad dirt, wrapped in rusted concrete and forgotten doctrine. Home to those power-armored ghouls still clinging to their ancient protocols like gospel carved in bone. It had stood untouched for decades. Because everyone else feared it. But now it was in the crosshairs. Johnny stood before the combined War Council ghouls, mutants, Lancaster scouts, and steel-eyed survivors who'd rebuilt civilization from ash. A map of the fort was spread across a steel table, dotted with bolt heads and spent casings. Drawn from recon intel, old vault records, and half-burned pre-war blueprints. Johnny ran a gloved hand along the southern perimeter. "We go in quiet. Mutants up front. Their size and armor can absorb the first response if it turns loud. Ghouls come in fast from the left slope. You know how these bastards think. You remember how they move. How they cover fire. Lancaster squad takes the west. That's where the power relays run through. Knock those out, they lose cameras, gates, comms, everything." Milo spat into a rusted can and growled. "What about the dead ones inside? We saw them last time." cryo-locked or hibernating or just sitting in their suits like mannequins. Johnny didn't blink. If they're still breathing, we drop them. If they're not, we melt the suits and salt the floor. The mutant leader leaned forward, resting his massive sledgehammer against the map's edge. We do not leave it standing. Johnny nodded. No. We don't. We make sure that no one ever digs this hole open again. Not raiders. Not warlords. Not the ghosts of the fucking past. The plan was simple. Not clean. Not quiet. But surgical. They moved at dusk 2 days later. Under cloud cover. No lights. No sound but the wind. 100 strong. Ghouls in street armor. Mutants carrying weapons too heavy for most humans. Lancaster marksmen posted on the ridge with scavenged optics. And Johnny, at the front. Carrying the .44, a new rebar-forged combat knife on his belt, and a fire that hadn't dimmed since the day Vault 717 fell. Fort Pioneer loomed out of the trees like a forgotten god, its walls cracked but still tall, antennae and decaying solar panels lining its watchtowers. A ghost made of steel and bad orders. But as Johnny looked up at it, he didn't feel fear. He felt clarity. We take it. We burn it. We bury the last of the old world tonight. Lancaster rises. And with that, the storm began. Smoke clung low across the tree line as the recon team returned, faces pale, gear rattling from the rush, eyes wide with that quiet, shared look only soldiers get when they see something they weren't supposed to survive. The lead scout Reed, ex-security from Lancaster's North Gate, pulled off his mask and dropped the binoculars on the map table. "God damn, Johnny. I'm glad we're here now." He pointed to the fresh sketch laid out in red charcoal. "They've got tanks. At least 3. Pre-war hardware. Tracked. Armored. Not all rusted, either. One of 'em's rigged to move. Test fired it into the woods while we were watching." He looked Johnny dead in the eye. They were gearing up for Lancaster. No doubt in my mind. Everyone went still. Mutants clenched their makeshift mauls a little tighter. Ghouls muttered curses in a dozen half-burned tongues. Even the humans, those with steady nerves and hard hearts, looked sideways at one another. Tanks. If those rolled into Lancaster streets, they'd be pulling survivors from rubble for weeks. Johnny stood still. The fire in his eyes didn't flare, didn't burn out. It focused. He stared down at the sketch at the tank bays, the gate, the faint patrol lines drawn from hours of recon. And then, quiet as thunder rolling in deep. "You're right." He looked up sharp, decisive. "We steal the tanks first." The room blinked. Milo coughed. The mutant leader grinned slow and wide. Johnny pointed to the positions. "I need 3 teams, 1 for each tank. Every team gets 1 human, 1 ghoul, one mutant. We moved together. We hit their power systems, fuel points, and backup cores. Fast. Before they know it's not a drill. He tapped his chest. I'm taking the lead one. I want a mutant on my right. A ghoul on my left. We hit hard, loud, and I make damn sure they see me. The mutant leader stepped forward. Crag, he said, nodding to a towering brute with oxidized chains hanging from his shoulder like tribal sigils. Johnny looked to Milo. Who you got? Milo pointed to a scarred ghoul with sunken eyes and a handmade grenade satchel. Lorne. He's good with blowing up dead things and used to work construction. Johnny gave them both a quick nod. Crag. Lorne. You're on me. Then to the rest. You all know your jobs. Don't treat this like a raid. Treat it like a theft. He paused, then added. Once the tanks are ours, we turn the whole goddamn fort into their tomb. And like that, the plan was set. 3 teams. 3 tanks. 1 mission. Steal the steel. Break the backbone of the old guard. And ride into the next war with their own weapons pointed the other way.